Secretary Sean Spicer. Sean, good to see you. Thank you for being with us.
You bet, Martha.
So, we watched you yesterday. You said we're going to vote and we're going to pass. We're going to pass this bill. And then we saw you today say there absolutely will be a vote and it will happen at 3:30. And then we all watched as that fell apart and the vote was pulled. What happened in between your last podium appearance and that fact?
Well, Speaker Ryan came and updated the president where the votes were. His team, including Majority Leader McCarthy and Congressman Scalise, the whip in the House, have been spending a lot of time talking to members, as well as the president and his team, the vice president, Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, Steve Bannon, Mick Mulvaney, and Tom Price had all been working the phones, been up and down on Capitol Hill, and frankly, we had about 10 or 15 people that we weren't sure that were going to be with us, and the Speaker ultimately decided it was better to pull the bill. But I think clearly the message today, the dissent is, Democrats own Obamacare. We got zero support from Democrats in this process, and the Obamacare, which is, the message is still the same. It's a failing system, skyrocketing premiums and deductibles and fewer choices, but is now squarely in the hands of Democrats that own this.
I want to ask you about this process because the president talked about loyalty. He said we learned something about loyalty, and that brings to mind the House Freedom Caucus. The conservatives who you guys fought very hard to get on your side, and then immediately when this thing went down, you see tweets from Jim Jordan, let's get started, we're ready to get this process restarted for repeal and replace. What do you feel when you hear that?
Well, I think the president said it best earlier today. He's a bit disappointed. He worked really hard, and he gave all of those members of the Freedom Caucus, as well as, frankly, all the members of the House Republican Conference, from the Tuesday group to the conference to the Republican Study Committee, an opportunity to have their voice heard, to have their ideas put into the bill. I think he not only acted in good faith, but he went above and beyond to make sure that ideas that strengthened the bill and sought to ensure that the goal that we all set out was achieved. But this truly was the opportunity to repeal and replace Obamacare. So to hear people talk about starting a process, I think that process did start, it did happen, and we had that opportunity.
Yeah. The president has done a lot by executive order. This was his first up at bat with legislative process. Was he angry when this fell through? I mean, how difficult is the reality of how tough it is, which John Boehner knew well, to pull the two sides, the moderates and the very conservatives, together in his own party? What was his reaction in the White House today?
Well, I think he's realistic. He understands that it was going to be tough, that there's a lot of disparate factions within the party that make up the conference. But he felt that he had really listened to everybody and given them an opportunity to have their voice heard and to share their ideas and their input. And I think that's what really buoyed us going into these final days. And I think clearly he's disappointed. He worked very hard for this. The team worked very hard for this. But he's got an ambitious agenda ahead in immigration reform, continuing to build the wall. His budget's very, very robust. The Washington Post, of all places, called it very Reagan-esque. And he's got a desire to do fundamental tax reform, something that we haven't seen since 1986. So the agenda moves on. The president is going to have a big, bold agenda. But ultimately, I think his view on health care is that this is going to collapse on its own. Democrats and some of these other members are going to come crawling back at some point and recognize that they're going to ask the president, once the system fails on its own, that they own. I mean, the people who stood with Nancy Pelosi today understand that system's going down, and the higher costs and the fewer choices that are going to continue to come of this bill are on their shoulders, not ours.
Let me ask you about reports last night that the president regretted that he went first to health care reform. And you heard, sort of signals of this from him in the past week or so. He really wanted to get to tax reform. Let's get this done so we can get to tax reform. And we were in North Carolina talking to voters and said, well, what's your priority? And, just a couple of people raised their hands for health care reform. They all wanted tax care reform. So does the president regret that he didn't go there first?
No, I think we all want tax reform. It's something that we haven't seen in this country since 1986. But the reality is, and this is where I think sometimes the arcane nature of the process doesn't allow for a full understanding of what's happening, but the savings that you achieve through Obamacare, which we were going to save many billions of dollars, can be used then towards the additional pot for tax reform. So interestingly, the more that you actually took care of this and got health care passed, and that's why the president kept saying, as you noted, let's get through through this, because the quicker that we get through this, the more opportunity and the more potential we have for the most robust tax and comprehensive plan we have.
I got to ask you something about Paul Ryan, because Rand Paul said during this process that the president had the wool pulled over his eyes by Paul Ryan, and that Paul Ryan and Reince Priebus really wanted the president to see this his way. Does the president feel like they overpromised and underdelivered, and does that affect the relationship going forward?
Not at all. The president was very complimentary of Speaker Ryan's performance. He knows how hard he worked to get this where it is. It was a very, very heavy lift. It was one of the most comprehensive reforms, not just of health care, but of an entitlement that we haven't seen in 30 years. This is a very big thing. I think it was something that we hope to get through, no question about it. But the agenda moves on. We've got a very, very bold and robust agenda that the president promised the American people, and we're going to roll on.
Yeah. There are reports on Breitbart and conservatives saying that they are calling for Paul Ryan to step aside. What's your response?
Well, it's up to the members of the House, but I think the president expressed his confidence in the Speaker today. Speaker worked very hard, as the president noted.